Paid for by Marjan Philhour for Supervisor 2020. Financial disclosures are available at sfethics.org.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am so excited to be here today with Sam Moss, the Executive Director of Mission Housing Development Corporation, to talk about housing. Housing touches all of us here in San Francisco. It's inextricably linked to some of the top priorities I've not only been hearing from residents, but voters who have been contacting our campaign to talk about the lack of available, accessible, and affordable housing. And so I'm really glad and honored to be sitting here with Sam today to demystify some of these concepts and to talk about what's really happening with housing in San Francisco today and how it's affecting all of us here in the Richmond. So Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Always happy to be on.
Well, thank you. So tell me a little bit about what you do at Mission Housing.
So Mission Housing is a 48-year-old nonprofit affordable housing development company. We are actually the first nonprofit affordable housing developer in San Francisco. There are about a half a dozen now that were started in and still focused in San Francisco. And what we do is we build and run 100% deed restricted, low income, subsidized affordable housing. That's a mouthful. Basically what we do is, we build and run low income housing. And that's it. We don't have any market rate. And then once we build the buildings, we have commercial spaces and nonprofits and things like that at the bottom, but we also provide on a daily basis, resident and community services to not only everyone that lives in our buildings, but the surrounding neighborhoods as well. So building it is what we get newspaper articles for, but the real hard stuff comes after we build it and how we can kind of enhance the neighborhood because of it.
Okay, got it. So could you describe for me and for our viewers, our campaign recently posted a Medium piece around affordable housing as both a concept and unfortunately a buzzword, right, around election time. So could you describe for us how exactly affordable housing gets built in San Francisco?
With a lot of heartache. That's the main ingredient that it takes. So a typical building will be built, it takes about 10 years from inception. And I mean, someone looks at a lot, like maybe a car lot on Geary, of which we know there are a few of them, and says, wouldn't it be great if there's affordable housing there instead of this parking lot? From that time, when someone in San Francisco, and then you need a nonprofit affordable housing developer to kind of agree to champion it until the building is full, until it's fully built and it's fully leased up, it's about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we build it is we locate a site, we purchase that site, either us or the city of San Francisco. We do that with affordable housing trust fund that we've created and bonds that you help pass while you're working at the city. And then we cobble those funds together with 9 other funding sources that come from the state and the federal government and local and philanthropy and just regular loans, private debt, just everything you can think of. And once we cobble that all together, and everything has to be perfectly lined up, and if you lose one funding source, you lose them all, then we hire a construction company, and it takes about 2 years to do the actual building part only takes about 2 years.
Wow.
And that includes leasing it up also.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's built, we move whatever tenant population we agreed upon, families or seniors or transitional age youth, formerly homeless individuals, things like that. We move them all in, and then we start administering the resident services that I talked about. So to build it, it's really hard. It's complicated, and there's just a ton of moving parts. But the number one moving part is funds. How do we get enough money to build it? Right now it costs about $2 million just to design and entitle the project. So in terms of architects and engineers and environmental reports and getting approvals from the planning department and then the planning commission and then the board of supervisors, that all takes about 2 years in and of itself, and about $1 million. So just to show you, it's astronomical just to get things off the ground.
It's clearly a labor of love, and also a timeline that would seem is really just inexcusable given how many people are really feeling it and suffering here in the city and how many people are getting displaced as well. Looking at the Richmond district, we've seen very, very few affordable housing units built or acquired over the past, 13 years projected, right? What I've seen based, on the city's website is we had 5 units built in 2016, the last election year, and in 2020 acquired 28 units through the soft sites program. So what do you think some of the impediments are out here in District 1 in the Richmond to building truly affordable housing to keep families and working people here?
Well, I think that the first thing the first thing I would always say is that it's a finite amount of money. The city of San Francisco builds more affordable housing than most states in our country. I know that everyone's favorite pastime is to, complain about the government and the mayor for not building enough affordable housing. But the simple fact is that we actually, citywide, our industry is doing a nationally renowned job. The problem is that it is a finite amount of money. And so basically one of every $3 that it takes to build affordable housing, one of every 3 affordable housing dollars comes from San Francisco. The other 2 come from somewhere else. That's a good way to simplify it. And because of that, and because of zoning laws in our city, and the way that we have zoned the city such that an apartment building, and you need to build apartments, you don't build, 4 townhomes that are affordable. You need to build no less than about 50, now maybe even closer to 75 unit minimum buildings for there to be enough rent that comes in after you build it to be able to run the building well. Nobody wants another Geneva Tower, no one. Nobody wants another Cabrini Green, and mostly are an industry. And the reason that those projects, became like that is because we didn't give them enough money. So
could you talk about that just a little bit more for people who don't know what happened there? Yeah.
No problem. So Cabrini Green and Geneva Towers were, when we say the projects in our country, I think that it's kind of like a 4-letter word. I said, if you're from the projects, I think everyone would kind of get some idea about the, relatively horrible living experience that it would be. And what those those were public housing buildings that had a lot of units, they were like 100 units or so, but they didn't have any money. No money came in every month. Barely. The rent went to the housing authority, and then it did not come back to the building to actually run the property.
Oh, I see.
These are institutional horriblenesses. It's nothing, the San Francisco Housing Authority is just one of many housing authorities that wasn't run very well. Our industry has since taken them over. And we know now that with the rent, the low income rent that we can expect from a unit, takes about 50 to 75 of those units to be in a building at once, so that the monthly rent that comes in is enough to make sure the roof doesn't fall in 10 years and to build it clean, and to provide the resident and community services like food pantry and free computer labs and things like that. So because of that, it's only legal to build an apartment in San Francisco right now on the east side of the city. So right now you can only have a single family home or 2 units in the overwhelming majority of the Richmond districts, for instance. And you say, well, what about the buildings that are apartments, right? There are apartment buildings in the Richmond. There are beautiful 8-story apartment buildings in the Richmond. My mom and dad live at 25th and Lake. I'm super well versed there. In that district, those buildings were legal when they were built, but they're not legal now. And so because we have rezoned the cities to make it such that only apartments are legal right now in the east side of the city, the Mission Bay, the Tenderloin, and I mean the Southeast. We all know North Beach hasn't gotten any affordable housing in a long time. So a long way of answering that is that because the money is finite, and we have up till now had no political will to say, why are we only building apartments on the east side? No one has really looked to the west side because it's so much harder to build the same building that would be basically approved immediately in the Mission. And the Mission is historically where a lot of our low-income individuals have lived, but that's no longer the case. The Richmond has the district. Oh my God, don't tell Laura. I can't. Richmond's District 2. District 1. Sorry.
It's okay. We're next to District 2.
Nerd I am.
We're all one city.
So District 1 has a lot of low-income families and a high and low-income senior rate, actually, we know. That's a lot, that's, I think, since we we rezoned the city like 40 some odd years ago. We essentially downzoned half of the city by making it only allowed to have a single family home or two. And then we raised the height limit in the Mission and Mission Bay and Tenderloin. And for all of the viewers who say to themselves, wasn't that incredibly racist? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we should, but we have the political will now to change that. But, you know, nonprofit affordable developers, we can only afford to have these large construction loans on our books for so long, you know? And so we can't, it's hard. It's a lot harder to go out to the Richmond or the Sunset, or, you know, on the West Side, where what you have to do is basically ask the city to change the legal zoning on one lot just to make it legal to start designing the project. And you're not allowed to buy it and get the money to design it until it's rezoned. So, you know, you're talking about like a year where the nonprofit would have to front the money itself. And so, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for our industry. I'm really proud to be helping lead a push in our industry to build on the West Side. But that is like the nuts and bolts reason where the impediment has come from. It's just frank, a lot easier right now to build affordable housing on the east side of our city.
Right. And in the meantime, we're really shortchanging our communities by limiting diversity of background and income. And I mean, that's how we all grow and thrive together. And we're just really limiting that.
Yeah.
Which, you know, brings me to my next question around, you know, in order to qualify to rent an affordable unit, there is a lottery system in place. And you hear people say, I mean, you have to get lucky, right? And you need to fit certain qualifications. And, you know, even, you know, our hardest working industries, teachers, firefighters, nurses, janitors, they don't even qualify, right, to apply. And so when you hear people say affordable housing, but affordable for whom, you know, I understand, like, if you base the qualification for affordable housing on median income, in a place where the median income is high, right, and not representative of those who need it the most, it might even mean that these affordable housing units that are subsidized and you need to get into a lottery to afford are going to be hard to afford. So are we serving working class people with this program?
We are. It is difficult in that regard. So there's a couple things to remember. The subsidy itself, the tax credit, the tax exempt bond, even at the Section 8 subsidy or wherever, it's not that we're choosing to use the median income. We are legally bound to use the median income if we want that subsidy. And if we don't get that subsidy, nothing gets built at all. So I'm not trying to say that that's correct. It's a conundrum. It's hard. You know, we have essentially gentrified the lowest income, you know, community members out of our neighborhoods over the last 20 years because we've so drastically underbuilt all levels of housing. And so it is tough to, when the new people move in San Francisco County, believe it or not, is actually, we have a little bit of like Sausalito, we have a little bit of San Mateo. So you can imagine the wealth that goes into the median. And for everyone that wants to know, the median income is the very center income. It's not the average, it's the center. So right now, for one person, it's about $75,000 a year. So for one person with a partner, you can't make more than so if you have a family of 4 right now, you can't make more than $100,000 a year to qualify for affordable housing. And your 2-bedroom unit will most likely be about $1,600 a month. Now, that is a lot compared to Michigan, compared to Fresno even. But it is still relatively extremely affordable compared to what that's $4,000 a month less than what some 2-bedrooms are going for. But it does mean that your income, you know, the incomes are higher than people realize. So with someone with a partner, you can't really make more than about 70 grand a year, the two of you. That's nothing, you know, that's hard. So we have a weird conundrum where the lower income community can't afford the rent because of what happens is that the tenant does pay all the rent now. There is no more like Section 8s. There's no more subsidy. The subsidy comes from like tax credits and money that we get to build it. So the tenant is responsible for all $1,800 of that, or $1,600. It can be really burdensome. And it's something that what we've been trying to do as an industry is to convince HUD, who is the Housing and Urban Development Department, the federal government, federal landlord, for lack of a better term. We've been trying to convince them to let us use more hyper local neighborhood levels.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we also think like district levels, could be. I actually don't like using district levels because I think it further exacerbates the fiefdomness. If you run and become supervisor, you don't act like you're the queen of a fiefdom, please. Okay.
Right. No, it's like you're running for supervisor, not dictator. Like, right.
So I'm not a huge fan of things that like separate supervisorial districts for that.
Right.
I do think that it should be the boundary of San Francisco and Treasure Island. I don't think that there's any reason why we shouldn't use our own local and instead of like the county area. And so, yeah, it's a hard thing, and it's something that we've really been lobbying HUD a lot for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about the Richmond in particular, I mean, we hear a lot of, and I love the character of our neighborhood. I love how the Richmond feels. I was born here. I spent the early part of my childhood here. And, my husband and I, we decided to come back and start and raise our kids here. So, what kind of affordable projects do you think would really enhance the wonderful character of our community? Because that's what it would do. What kind of affordable projects do you think would be great for the Richmond?
I think that, I'm a big fan of, I'm a big fan of projects that have two different kinds of populations that live there. Like Valencia Gardens is a really good example. That was a really old, bad building. It was public housing that Mission rebuilt. Now it's 200 families living next to 50 seniors. It's a separate building for seniors, and then there's a few other apartment buildings for the townhomes for the families. And I think you need to take a look at your demographics in your neighborhood, but the Richmond is very much senior and family oriented. And so, even if it was 100% family or 100, I think that the Richmond could really use a large 100% affordable building with like tens of thousands of square feet of like community serving spaces and nonprofits and restaurants and things like that on the bottom. I think that especially along Geary and Clement, there's some patches there that would really benefit from a giant building like that being dropped, something that's open all day, right?
Yeah.
We always like to say that affordable housing makes your neighborhood safer, right? One thing Mission Housing is looking into now is every one of our buildings, their LEED goal, they're net energy zero. The LEED system is actually just catching up to the affordable housing, the market rate system. And so, one thing we're looking at is having these giant batteries installed at each property and like saving up about 2 weeks of power using our solar panels from the roof.
Wow.
So then in the event of a catastrophe, our buildings will become a triage center for the neighborhood. And so I think a larger build rather than like smaller, I really do think like 100-unit family buildings would be really great for the Richmond. I think there's a ton of families that live there, that live in District 1 that would qualify. And I think there's a bunch of families in the city that would love to live there. One other thing that's important to know is like when you get a 100% affordable project, the amount of buses increases, the public services increase, the city is investing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. They're not going to do that and then like not invest afterwards to make it as good as
infrastructure. Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds like the kind of community enhancement that we need out here. And also just to, this is a really giving and inclusive community. And I just feel like that's an area around affordable housing where we've fallen short over the past couple of decades. And, when I posted about my support for 100% affordable housing, almost 10,000 people saw our post, right? And so we got a lot of different feedback, and I got some pushback and feedback around inclusionary housing that I think we should address here and potentially clarify for folks around why inclusionary housing is such a controversial issue in San Francisco. And, frankly, I don't see how we pay for substantial affordable housing without our inclusionary policies in San Francisco. So can you shed some light on that?
Sure. So, we have in the late 70s, when the federal government kind of got out of the housing subsidy industry, instead choosing to subsidize home owning mortgages. Once the federal government stopped funding affordable housing, we inexplicably, and we created the tax credit and all these neoliberal things. We inexplicably we live in a neoliberal health state. Marjan. We inexplicably have tied the production of affordable housing to market rate housing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fact. This is just a fact. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter how capital P you capitalize the P in your progressive moniker. You still need market rate housing to fund affordable housing. And that's because
so how does it make sense to only be for 100% affordable? I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's just.
It doesn't. It's great. And we should prioritize at all times. If we have the money I'm a firm believer then if we have the money and we can build 100% affordable and it's there and there could be a market rate, I do believe we should be building the 100% affordable first. And I know you do too.
Yeah.
But you can't, to say that we only want 100% affordable is equivalent, unless you are, to be frank, I'm actually okay with like the mission being just 100% affordable or nothing, because honestly, we have, the mission's been the gentrification bomb that went off there because of the laws that we all passed 40 years ago. I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. But if the overwhelming majority rests of the city, it's akin to just knowing that you're saying you don't want anything at all, because to fund 100% affordable is really expensive. For each 150 units, it's about $80 million. That's a lot of money. And that's not unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
When you won't let market rate housing be built, it means that fees aren't coming in, and those fees are what refill the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is what our city uses to fund affordable housing. That's how they're tied together. Yes, every 5 years we have a big housing bond, and that passed, and that's a lot of money, and that's great. Mm-hmm. But the $600 million in bond that we just passed, that's already spent. That's already called for. It's done. Not one project has actually started yet from it, but it's in one way or another, all of that money's taken. And so in between those.
What do you mean by that? In that,
we have 1,000 units in Sunnydale and Potrero that need to be rebuilt. Mm-hmm. That's 2/3 of the money right there. There's a project in Haight-Ashbury, District 5, that's already been allocated the money necessary to build. Mm-hmm. There's a few 100% affordable projects that have been waiting for up to 10 years for funding that have finally been backfilled. I know the Tenderloin Neighbor Development Corp, TNDC, Mission Housing has a couple projects. We inherited 75 old public housing units. 18 of them are townhomes on the Great Highway. Mm-hmm. We need funds to rehab them. So the way that you need this like replenishing source, and bonds aren't replenishing, right? They're like a one-time paycheck. Mm-hmm. But projects happen every year. You need to be able to build every single year, right? You need 5,000 units every single year, and you can only have so many bonds. And so the way to refill the pot of money that you can keep going every year is to take fees from market rate projects. Mm-hmm. So if a market rate project wants its entitlement, and market rate isn't the devil, like it blows me away that, and I get that some supervisors have been elected using those words, and like it plays really well with mostly progressive white people. Like I get that, but like market rate housing is fine. Not all market rate housing is luxury housing, but what all market rate housing does do is pay a fee to the city in exchange for getting being allowed to build the market rate housing, and that fee goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about inclusionary housing, right? If you're saying, well, what if they build the affordable housing on site and it's not 100% market rate, it's a mixed income project, and that's all well and good. Mm-hmm. But I believe that my industry, instead of building it on site, if a developer pays a fee and my industry gets to use that money, we can get a lot more out of that $1, right? Mm-hmm. San Francisco only needs one of every $3 for it to be 100% affordable. And so, I think the best use is to let market rate buildings be built, have them pay a fee into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and then demand, you have to make it easy enough. You have to make it buy right. You have to get rid of all these restrictions so that my industry can come in and build the affordable project, either while or maybe even before the market rate is finished. Mm-hmm. The problem is that we've made it so hard to build the affordable piece that lots of times, if there is going to be 100% market rate and 100% affordable somewhere nearby, they're not built very close to each other. There's been like decades in between. And so, there's no gentrifying mitigating factor. You lose that. And so, saying that you're only for 100% affordable, like, doesn't make you pro development or anything. It makes you, it's not realistic. It's just not, it's not a reality that we actually live in. It just sounds really good in a soundbite.
Is there an example of, could you give an example where, you must hear about these projects all the time, where the choice is between building a much larger number of affordable units for people who are at risk of being priced out of the city, of being displaced, where there was an opposition to market rate housing, right? So the result was something where a fraction of those affordable units were built because the market rate was prohibited from being built. Is there something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it happens all the time. And just in terms of the people say that that's like segregation. I'm a firm believer that the integration happens on the ground floor in community spaces, not on the 18th floor of some luxury condo. A recent example is in the Excelsior district. Originally, Bridge Housing was going to build a 75 unit, 100% affordable project at a funeral home. And then they went through all of it and is actually approved, and they were about to break ground. And then they actually partnered with a market rate developer who bought the lot across the street, and they were going to combine forces. Next door. They were going to combine forces, 40% affordable, 60% market rate in the end, and there was going to be like 150 affordable units. 75. My numbers could be way off, but there also would have been 150 market rate units. I think that there was a lot of things that went into that decision. I know a lot of community members who didn't want that project. They didn't want it to change. They felt like they'd already kind of agreed with Bridge and it was going to be 100% affordable. And they fought the new project, even though it would have delivered like 70 more affordable units than the original one. And in the end, the market rate developer pulled out, and Bridge Housing had to go back to its original plan. And so now we're getting about 75 or 80 affordable units when we could have had well over 100, but we're also not getting any market rate units. And, I think that that's an example that, maybe that's not the greatest example in the sense that the low-income community that fought that didn't want any market rate, that just wanted 100% affordable, had really been the driving factor behind buying the original site and getting it designed and having it be 100% affordable. But we do get into the point where a lot of people hate market rate housing more than they actually support affordable housing. And, I think that unfortunately, a lot of our West Side districts and neighborhoods are like that, that they would rather kill market rate housing than gain affordable. Mission Housing, for example, we're a co-affordable developer at the Balboa Reservoir, which is, one of your neighbors. We're hopefully going to have about 1,100 units, and it'll be truly 50% affordable. 550 affordable family units, 550 market rate units. If it was 100% affordable, we would have 120 affordable units. So that's 400 units that we would have lost, but there wouldn't be any market rate, and it would just be a giant parking lot and park. There are tons of neighbors in Westwood Park and Sunnydale that are screaming for this, that we should just have the 100% affordable. And, I think that you can sound righteous, right? You can say that you're not anti-development. You're saying you'd like this building to get built. It's just if it was 100% affordable. And
I also think that part of it is because of all the rhetoric around elections. And, people are busy, they're working, and to get into all the details, which are complex, as they should be when you're dealing with housing and finance, right? I think just demystifying it as we're doing here, because I think most residents do want to be inclusive. They do want a diverse and thriving neighborhood. And because of the rhetoric, mostly around campaigns, but sometimes around other things over the years, we are where we are. And so, and just to give this some kind of perspective, when you're talking about units, 175 units, 400 units, 80 units, right? Can you give our viewers an idea of exactly how much we've been under building to keep up with population, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've been adding 8 jobs for every 1 unit of housing that we've been building in the Bay Area, like since I was born.
Mhm,
You know, we need to build thousands of units a year just to really keep up with demand.
And what do you say to the argument about like the 55,000 units in the pipeline that
I would say that they are counting Sunnydale and Potrero and Treasure Island, and most importantly, they're still counting the shipyard. Um,
oh,
and that's 35,000 of the 50 that you just talked about. So cool, but you know, the same people saying that would rather put low-income people onto a Superfund site than to let an apartment building get built in the marina. You
see,
know, so sure, we do have those units in the pipeline, and they took 10 years each to get into the pipeline. And there was a recession and a recovery within that time, and now we're back into another recession. So we've made it so hard, you know, we make it so hard to get entitlements that you miss your funding window, and you got to wait 5 years, and then who knows what's going on.
Well, thank you. I mean, this was so incredibly helpful, and I think you really helped kind of clear up a lot of these questions that have been coming up, like mostly through Zoom calls, but emails and also online.
Yeah.
But thanks for spending your time with us today.
Good luck.
Okay. Okay, talk to you soon. Okay, bye.